Hello. First of all, thanks a lot for getting a hold of this video. I hope it can be helpful. If you still have any questions you feel like are unanswered or whatever at the end of it, feel free to drop me an email or a message on Facebook or whatever. But basically, I'm going to try and go over the kind of techniques I use in my pencil work. So here in the background, I'm flipping through some of my sketchbooks to give an idea of some finished work and some rougher stuff and thumbnailing too. But I wanted to keep this video real time, so I've gone for a sort of fairly quick sketch. I think the total time was about 2 hours. So that means I can. I figured if I sped the video up, it wouldn't really work in pencil. It would just kind of be a blur of hands. So I'm gonna go over like how I'd go about sketching something and rendering it, and some shortcuts for quickly getting a lot of value down, and just whatever comes to mind while watching it. But yeah, as you can see, like my sketchbooks are a mixture of finished things and really, really rough sketches, and some good advice we got from an anatomy teacher once was just not to be afraid of making really ugly drawings. So never lose the fear to mess a page up or whatever. Yeah. So I think I bring up some framed work here as well. I want a few more finished pieces, and been trying to upscale the pencil work recently with this huge thing, which has been a challenge, but it's fun. Yeah, so in a minute I'll take out the blank page. I think here I tried to film this while holding it. It doesn't work very well, but I guess you get an idea of what it is. But yeah, the reason for showing this is no matter the level of finish, the techniques I'm going to try and show in this video are basically what I apply to anything. It's just maybe a matter of giving it some more polish or a little more care in the early stages, for some more detailed work. But it essentially comes down to the same approach. You can see some of my mum's paintings in the background there. She's pretty good herself. Definitely a big influence getting me started at a young age. So here we have the blank page. I tend to start as best as the hardest part obviously is forming an idea, and a lot of the work is done before you put a pencil to paper, ideally. I was really struggling with trying to come up with an idea for this. I think, the goal being filming a drawing, maybe it just put some pressure on my head, but I couldn't come up with anything. So in the end, I just had to turn the camera on and see what would happen, which is probably why it ended up as like a fairly generic portrait of some, beautiful woman. But yeah, I start with a fairly structural approach, but in the back of my head, I try and have some sense of some 2D elements as well. I find if I only build things up like a mannequin, they end up, looking like mannequins. So it's this kind of combination of putting marks down that suggest the three-dimensional structure while still trying to plan in my head some of the how it's actually going to be drawn in finer detail, which I suppose is a compilation of probably like memory from everything from movies you've watched to people you've passed in the street, or a lot of times it'll be light from life drawing I've done in the past, which is why I really recommend doing a lot of that if you can. I find it when you have to spend a few hours trying to capture a subject, it really sticks in your memory. So I try and for a start resist putting down any heavy marks in the beginning, though I wouldn't worry too much. From experience, I don't know, I really don't believe you can fuck a page up so badly that it can't be salvaged unless you've put a hole in it. Like, there's almost always a way to take off enough of the graphite to have it looking alright. It depends. If there's a few areas that you have to leave white, it can be really frustrating when you've put a mark down. I think I showed off the tools I was using in the beginning. So that's a 0.3 mechanical pencil with HB lead in it. It's not really that important. I mean, half a millimeter is fairly normal for a mechanical pencil. But you could do any of this with a wooden pencil, really. I used to be very, like, I don't think I touched a wooden pencil for like 5 years after I first got into drawing again. When I first started taking it seriously, I sort of completely went with the mechanical pencils on that sort of mindset that more detail would be better. But having worked with charcoal a lot now as well, the tools really aren't that important. And HB, you don't need like a huge range of lead grades or whatever. When you see people those packs of like 20 different graded pencils, it all becomes a bit redundant in my opinion. You can get pretty much any values out of an HB. I do keep a little chunk of graphite stick as well, which you'll see me using a lot later. I like it, gives off interesting textures, and I like anything where you can rapidly cover the page. So here with the head construction, I normally try and place the shape of the skull, hair, neck, shoulders, that kind of thing first, like the big masses. If you can get them in place and reading nicely, then you've got to start with that. It's some people are really, really good at working from details outwards, and then you have those kind of, someone had a post recently from Kim Jung-ji explaining his drawing style. I don't know if you've seen his work, but he seemingly starts in the middle of the paper and will draw these incredibly complex scenes with no construction before. But the thing he said, his key was visualization. So that's some really advanced level stuff. I'd love to be able to do that, but me personally, I tend to fall more towards putting all the big masses in first, which is the idea that if they work, then all you have to do is find a way to place the features within that. Whereas if you sort of start with the features and work outwards, it's quite easy to end up with like really wonky drawings that don't make sense. But just for the first half an hour, I pretty much accept it's going to look wrong. Like, the thing about drawing faces is they kind of inherently look funny when you get the proportions wrong. So it can be a little like, I used to find it so irritating when I began that everyone would have like bizarre expressions, and I still do a bit of it even now. But drawing from imagination is all about building towards a final thing. Like, very few people can just go straight to the end result, and even then that takes years and years of practice, and you'll get faster. But just I like to think of imagination drawing as you just got to get something down, and then once you have something on the paper, you can start playing the game of how do I make this better, what's wrong with it, how can I improve it. So here I'm brainstorming. I was thinking of doing another sort of, I think right at the beginning I was thinking of doing like another android girl with an exposed robot brain or something on the side of the head. But I sort of just slowly moved away from it in favor of an arm. So once I have the big masses of the head down, oh look, there's my face really close to the camera. I think I fixed the angle halfway through. This is a little awkward for me to watch. It's too much. So I then start by placing the brow. I like how those little diagonal marks, sort of like placing the eyebrow and how it connects to the top of the ridge of the nose is normally like the first mark I put down, because it says so much about the angle of the face, and like depending on how high up it is, or you can set whether it's a 3/4 face or facing you from the front or the side. I just find it personally a useful spot, but maybe I don't think there's any right method on that. Just go with whatever seems intuitive. So I place that, and then when you draw eyes, I always start just with a sense of the eyelids, and then a kind of general blurry blob where the iris will be, and you can come back and clean it up. But I find, once again, those are just bigger masses of the eye, I suppose. It's trying to get a sense of an eyeball, a sphere behind the head there. So you might also notice that my hand is really shaky here because I wouldn't really draw on something this small on an easel, so it was kind of hard for me to get a stable position, but that's okay. So I'll often start with fairly fuzzy lines everywhere. I'm not trying to put a sharp outline on everything. I don't really think in terms of contour very well. I always find it easier to think about where the light is coming from, even in the beginning. That's one of the first things I want to decide on. So I'll have a heavier, softer line under the jaw, and then you'll see I try and leave as much, basically try and draw as little as possible for the features. I'll keep coming back in with the soft eraser at various points. There's my coffee cup. I'll come back in with the soft eraser at various points and just lighten up the features. And there's a fun trick, I think I do it at some point in this, that Ville showed me, where he will, that's a friend of mine, he'll tear off a little piece of his eraser, roll it into a sausage, and then kind of gently roll it across the drawing, and you can kind of make the whole thing like 50% lighter, and it's really nice to sort of do your initial pass and then do that and then keep coming back in, and it lets you develop it more and more. I used to be very particular about keeping a drawing clean all the way through, but I found now if you want to render in a quick way, one of the biggest wastes of time that I would do is continuously, trying to like maintain, just keep the drawing clean. When I find it easier, just to let the textures build up a little bit naturally. I sort of try and transition into the rendering smoothly rather than fully doing the line drawing and then blocking in the shadows or whatever, which I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Maybe that's laziness. But so you can see here I'm already trying to define the light is coming from the top right hand side, so on that side of the brow, next to the bridge of the nose, under the jaw, I'm starting to just go a little heavier. I moved the eye up as well. This is the first half an hour, first hour, however long it takes until you have a drawing that you're happy with. You have to be completely prepared to just erase and redraw something in an instant. I'm pretty sure I redrew this eye 4 or 5 times because it looks rubbish. It doesn't really fit the angle of the head at the moment. But yeah, just don't stress. Have fun in the beginning. This is where you should the reason you can't stress too much about the technical side is, if you want to get down an interesting design or communicate an idea effectively, more and more I have to not be worrying so hard about about the other things and just trust that you can pull them together. So I think I've probably gone into just drawing the face here because I'm procrastinating actually figuring out what this is a drawing of. Yeah. That's me sipping coffee. Well, taking it slow, taking it easy. I guess the sort of classical art method that God, I hate saying that. It sounds so elitist, but that kind of really old-fashioned traditional approach to drawing a subject would be block it in, do a rough block in, refine the lines till the drawing is accurate, and then what we would do is block in all the shadow masses so that you have a sort of two-tone image. In your head, you essentially divide everything into in light and in shadow. It's really, I mean, that's one of the most helpful things about doing cast drawings, is you can like make the rules of how that works kind of like second, just intuitive. You just want you want it to, I mean, the more and more you can make technical concepts effortless, the more you can actually draw interesting things, which I'm trying to move towards, but I'm still not really that good on the technical front either. Yeah, don't forget the ear. Faces look weird without ears. It took me years to learn that. I have so many old paintings where there are unfinished ears, and it would have like improved the drawing. It would have been like, just way better with an ear. It's that kind of everything on the page relates to everything else. And along those lines, a really good habit to get into is to try and always take on whatever looks weakest in the drawing. I always used to have a bad habit that would make it take forever to finish anything. For the first few years when I was trying to self-teach painting, I would sort of, because I'd mostly done photo studies of portraits. I mean, I still have this problem where, like a real bias towards drawing faces, but where I would plan out this whole image, and then it would sort of like be a giant mess. I would pick one of the faces. I would spend like 5 hours on it and make it look okay, and then I would just completely freeze, because I would start tackling other parts of the page, and then I'd be like, oh well, maybe it doesn't look right yet because the portrait's still a little off. So I'd go back over there and keep working on it, and it took forever. And more recently, just trying to like trying to ask yourself questions while you work, like what's weakest here right now, what's missing, like try and think about doing the action that would make the biggest difference with the least effort. And if you keep doing that, eventually you have to tackle the difficult bits, but it's just like a good way to keep things moving forwards. So I mean, I'm sure fairly soon, I think I started, I think at this point she was going to have wires hanging and sort of entering the back of her head, which probably would have been pretty cool. You might have noticed I'm using that paper smudging thing. Mine's already just really covered in graphite from use, which doesn't take long to build up if you use them to smudge, but just it works pretty much like the smudge tool in Photoshop. I mean, funnily enough, the smudge tool in Photoshop probably works like smudging things in real life, but if you get them kind of dirty from use, it's kind of like having a soft brush or something, like a soft round brush. And I don't know, I have this thing where, because I got into Photoshop before I really got into rendering in traditional media, I always think of everything as analogous to some digital tool, rather than the other way around. But given her really soft, I think I was going for the sort of hadn't slept in a year look at this point, which I might have toned down. But I like using I like trying to a technique that you often use drawing from life is squinting down and seeing, trying to capture. Squinting down's a useful technique that lets you do things like see which edges are the sharpest on the subject, how the light is actually falling across the whole subject. And you should use it on your own drawing as well. If you've done a lot of life drawing and you've done quite a lot of portraits from life, you can start squinting down at your own drawings and noticing like patterns, things that are missing. You might say, all my materials are rendered the same, or there's not enough contrast across this, there's not a clear direction to the light, those kind of things. So quite early on, I try and separate. It's not that I'm trying to fully render each material, but it's a good idea to get an idea of what's going to be lighter than what, like I like to sort of look at the points where different materials meet and decide, which one is going to be darker than the other one. So on the hairline there, I don't think I had decided at this point whether it was going to be like really dark or really light hair. It's kind of could go either way at the moment. Oh, look at that. Just another girl in a dress. How surprising. Who would have seen this coming from me? I try and block in drawing as quickly as possible. Like like when I'm drawing someone's arms or something, I tend to try and think about where the hands will be, and then just make the arm work to fit that. I find it easier than drawing outwards towards a hand, because it's kind of like you have less control over how it's going to end up looking on the page. I don't like that feeling of drawing out towards an unknown result. I find it easier to sort of like place the hand or place the feet and then make the rest of it work. It's almost like you're just getting a big blob down on the page, and if that blob looks plausible, then it's like, well, there's a way of making the drawing work within that blob. So I think she was going to have at this point her left arm, or I even thought about the idea of like a sort of open chest cavity and robotic interior, but I probably got lazy. I normally try and pursue more ambitious things, but like I said, I wanted this demo to be in real time, and I just don't think I could talk about it for more than 2 hours. Lots of finger smudging. I like to... Oh, there's my ear. I like to work from soft to hard in terms of edges. So I quite like starting with everything blurry. I think to me it ends up looking a little more natural than having a really sharp drawing right up till the end and then trying to figure out which edges to smudge. Because it always feels like getting rid of information on purpose, which is a difficult decision to make. But I like working from a kind of vague state and then figuring out where I want the sharpness and the texture and things like that. It makes more sense to me. It's like putting accents in rather than, it just makes sense to me that way. One of the most important things is having a clear direction. Thumbnailing's pretty important. Thumbnailing's huge, though there are certain kind of results that you're less likely to get while thumbnailing. Like in some sense, by thumbnailing a piece, you place a different kind of restriction on it. Like sometimes it's fun to just approach a page and then see where it goes, in exactly that moment, by just following your instincts, and you're going to end up with a result that you might not have got. But for client work or anything complicated, I definitely recommend it. Yeah, I think here was where I thought like a big skeletal oversized robot hand would look kind of cool. So I blocked it in a few times. Like everything else you see, the first time I draw something, it normally just looks completely wrong. But that's what you get when you work from your head. It's like a balance between taking the time to visualize things in advance, which I think ultimately would be the best if you could, just see the drawing on the paper and finish it. But for me, I kind of like just to throw something down there and go from there and just keep working and keep asking the right questions. So, slowly some values crept in here, which is fine, but you just have to be aware that, as you put more stuff down, you're making more of a commitment to the drawing. So if you're going to spend, if this is going to be something you're going to spend a long time on and you really want to make it the best it could possibly be, then it is worth holding off. It is worth keeping it just lines and just a simple block in, because you have to be pretty... My painting teacher in at school would always say, "You've got to kill your babies." That was his analogy for it, and he would sort of mime, shooting like a little pistol into the floor, and it was always pretty funny. But just the idea that you have to craft everything, like with love and care, but if it's wrong, it's got to go. And it's like I let myself creep ahead stages in the drawing, as long as the trade-off is, if I realize I've drastically messed up later on, I have to be completely okay with getting rid of huge areas. And I've been finding this a lot on this big drawing I've been working on, where I'll there might be areas that like 3 weeks ago I put a long time into drawing, and now that it's further along, they just don't work. And like yesterday, I found myself erasing this big portion. It felt really good, actually. It's really nice to think about what your goals are as you're working on it. If you're just sketching in a sketchbook, you're just trying to get some ideas out, don't worry about that stuff. Just loosen up, have fun with it. But if you're trying to make something presentable, it doesn't even bother me. Like if the goal is to have it look as good as it can possibly look, and you're putting in multiple tens of hours, then I find it feels quite good getting rid of an area when you realize it doesn't work. It feels like you've made a good decision. Like the thing I hate more than anything is getting stuck and feeling stagnant while working on something. I find, I don't find taking on hard problems is I think that's pretty enjoyable. I think most people probably do, or they wouldn't choose to get into drawing, But it's just taking on hard problems and nothing happening, or just feeling like you don't know what to do. Like that's the worst. So big part of learning to make good finished work isn't even you're not necessarily going to be effortlessly better for quite a long time. Like you get saturated with a lot of videos of people working on stuff and making it look completely effortless, and I mean that really takes a long time to develop. And in the beginning, you have to make a real conscious effort to come up with I think questions you can ask yourself to figure out how to keep moving on something. Like when people say study the fundamentals, like a huge part of that is just learning what the fundamentals are, because it goes from I don't know how to draw to I'm having trouble with the perspective on this drawing, and now you have a problem where you can go in and why is the perspective wrong? Have I actually placed my horizon line? All that kind of stuff. Or values, why does this look flat? Because when you see real beginner questions online, there are always things like how do you color it in? How did you do the colors? That's that's as vague as asking how did you do the lines? It won't reflect anything about what they were thinking about. So learning fundamentals and studying is a big process of learning what actually makes up a drawing, and it might be it's going to be a long time till anything's effortless. Those to me are the scarier moments sometimes when you're drawing, is when you really struggle through something. Even when you finally finish it, there's a voice in the back of your head that's and the next one's going to be just as hard, So if you don't learn to love doing that, this is a difficult thing to try and do. So I smudged in the background a little bit there. I just feel like some people are really good at seeing contour. For me, it's too abstract, or lines, without using the pretentious word. But I find by just putting in little bits of value, all of a sudden I can recognize the mass of the head, and I can just kind of see it better. But always trying to be restrained. There's no need to go and block the whole background in now, because that would be limiting for this sketch. But yeah, I mean if rendering's not a sticking point, draw loads in pen. It's fun thinking about how the medium affects the outcome. It's not quite as simple as you just switch medium and you would end up with the same image. I know, if I told myself I was going to if I was just gonna, draw a person or draw some scene or whatever, and then in one timeline I do it in pencil, and in another I do it digitally, despite the fact that the like initial conditions, the inside of my head, are identical, the drawing that's going to come out is going to be radically different, compositionally, design, like everything based on the medium you use. And I don't know why that is, but but it just is for me. Like I have real trouble drawing well when it comes to digital. You can see I like get quite close to the page a lot, and tend to be like more interested in like the little tiny differences in line that make a difference to the way an eye looks, and I always jump too quickly into value and whatever in digital, so ends up different. But yeah, pencil, I don't know, has just naturally become a favorite medium of mine, I suppose. It's the first one I used, so maybe it's laziness or whatever, but I like the way you can build things up slowly, but it's got a little more permanence than digital. So it's this mixture between, like, it's not quite a pen drawing where you have to really practice like your visualizing abilities, because you can't exactly scribble down a gesture in like a marker pen and then go back, and it'll just become kind of a mess. So I've always liked pencil. I think it gives you a nice mixture between it's sort of like encouraging you not to keep going backwards and keep erasing, but at the same time being quite like malleable and quite changeable. So I start at points like this. I really start to think about like which edges are going to be the most prominent. Like when you're working quickly, things like defining where the jawline is going to be, where different materials and different blocks of value like behind or in front of each other. I even start dropping in hints of like the occlusion shadows here. You'll see like some tiny little darker areas behind and around the ears, or kind of near the sleeve, or maybe next to where the neck and hair join. And that's basically I try and save the darkest points as much as possible. So sometimes having like a really ghostly drawing and then just putting them in like reminds you not to use that value everywhere else, or helps me to control my value range a bit. But some of this stuff is just slow work. Yeah, here I'm trying to, a big part of how her face structure is going to look is the brow and cheekbone. So that area I spend quite a lot of time figuring out how it's going to relate to the hair behind it and the fringe and that kind of thing. Blocked little areas of shadow next to the bits of hair on the fringe, and using my my smudgy stick, and you can see what that's already starting to do is I'm already deciding I'm going to handle the hair differently to the other materials. It's got to look slightly wavy and like it's flowing, so I'm doing little patches of darker value but trying to leave natural highlights so it looks kind of like it's shiny or something, while at the moment leaving the face mostly white. I mean, value range is a big one you talk about with pencil. It's very difficult to like getting a sense. Like there's a bunch of different ways you can take on how you're going to handle your value range in pencil, and you should vary it depending on whatever the vision for the piece is. Like, what's the mood meant to be, and just what's the feeling, like what are you trying to communicate, should decide. Well, that should decide everything first and foremost. There's no there aren't really any rules strictly, like you can just draw whatever you want. Like all these technical they're like tricks or useful tools for speaking in the language of realism, but you can blur that line, you can introduce graphic elements, you can make things surreal, you can render in a way that's influenced by photography. You might want to try and draw in some lens flare for some reason, like anything you want. But that, like, so when I pick a value range, for instance, I tend to, when I want to render things quickly, I really go for like compressing compressing the lightest values. So I mean, if you say look at my skin, you know, while I'm working, there's a huge range of values on it. There's still obvious lights and darks, but it's nowhere near a white, you know, and it's nowhere near like a plain white page white. But if you were drawing this, you would probably want to, because pencil can't go that dark. It doesn't really go black. It doesn't go close to like an oil black or a charcoal black. But you want to try and maintain the relationship between your lights and your darks. That's what's going to give you a sense of light and contrast. So if you can't make your shadows any darker, you have to make your lights lighter. But so what that means is compressing. That's what I do. So you'd take, say, maybe the upper 20% of your values, this like fairly light grey to white, and just say everything in that range is page white now. And now how dark is this material relative to that? And you can maintain the same. You can sort of maintain the same illusion of contrast. Your brain doesn't need it. You know, it doesn't need a full value range to understand light. And often it's better not to have one. I mean, and that depends entirely on your like medium, the color of your paper, everything. I mean, even in digital, you have to do it. Really, it's not like you could say, you know, say staring into the sun or a really bright light bulb. Like, what value is that in Photoshop? It's like unachievable. So the only way to like make it look that bright is to, you know, really, you wouldn't paint the sun as a white circle. You would do this huge, you know, blown out, maybe overexposed sky, and then you get the impression that it's really bright. And you do the same thing in pencil. Tweaking the eyes, getting rid of the bags, putting the bags back in. When it comes to eyes, yeah, so normally trying to get like the depth right in the corner of the eye, like in between the eyelid. There's kind of a fold on the upper eyelid, on the inner edge near the nose. There's normally a little dark accent there. And then, I mean, the trick that everyone goes on about for drawing eyes is with the iris, have it lighter on the side, opposite to the direction of the light. So if the light is coming from the top right, you just leave a little light bit of iris on the bottom left, so it looks like the light is shining through the eye, and then put your little highlight in. And it's a bit gimmicky, really. Like once you have a way of drawing an eye that looks good, it's one of the easier things, I would say, on this scale at least, because they're very small and you can simplify them a lot. But yeah, because they're so small, you know, I can't be in there trying to draw veins in the eye or like the exact structure of like how the eyelid's looking at. You have to just go for the main impression. All right, I'm not sure what happened there. I think I went to check how the footage was looking and noticed that my face was in it the whole time. So from this point onwards, I think there'll be 100% less of my nose, maybe. All right, just adjusting that easel. It was very annoying. Kept pushing the page around, as you can see. So honestly, if I was going to keep working on this drawing, if I wanted to develop it more, right now the thing to take would still just be the design, composition, you know, like where is this going? But I think I was split between having another healthy arm, maybe like, I think you can kind of see a blocked in hand resting on her bicep. I thought that might look kind of interesting, but in the end I went for the hanging arm by her side. This is one of the, like, just trying to explore little details like how the hair tucks behind the ear, you know, and try and, like, when you're drawing from imagination, try to like as much as possible, try to imagine, like really try to imagine how it would look. Like stop thinking entirely in terms of like, you know, fundamental drawing techniques, and just think for a second, like, you know, how does hair like this look? Like how would hair tucked behind an ear look? Should it be like going over the tip of our ear a little bit? Should we be seeing some hair on our face? Like, you know, what's going to look more natural? And that's, I mean, that's where references are most helpful, in my opinion, is you take a drawing about this far, try and get it fairly developed, and then search for relevant references and look for those little things that are gonna just take it that bit further. You know, like I'll often I like looking at, you know, if I'm doing an effect like a starry night sky or raindrops or smoke or little bits of like shrubbery growing, waves, clouds, things like that. I tend to reference stuff like that more because it's quite hard to come up with convincing natural looking patterns, and I find just by having a reference open, it lets me try and understand, well, it lets me try and break things up, and it's like that whole thing. There was some exercise where if you ask people to, or at least I think if you ask kids to draw stars on a page, like, or just dots on a page, and put them in a random order, most people kind of dot randomly so it looks fairly evenly spaced, and you end up with just kind of like evenly spaced dots across the whole page, which of course is quite an ordered pattern. So the same kind of thing applies if you're drawing a tree with branches, or plants and shrubbery, or folding in clothes and hair, and just all these kind of like, you know, really complex natural systems. That's what I really like to use reference for, just to remind myself what it looks like. You know, things normally group and cluster, and there'll be areas that look unnaturally empty versus areas that are very densely packed. It's like, I feel like we have a strong bias towards the kind of contrast present in natural, you know, in nature. I think those are the things that look best to us. Like most of the tricks that people use for composition, like how you place things on a page, and like getting a nice sense of balance and weight and movement, like they're all like reflections of the way natural systems appear. You know, like even looking, say, like when you look at a tree and the way the different leaves clump together, or the way branches grow, like all of these different things. I'm really bad at doing them without just looking at stuff to remember. But also a lot of life drawing helps you develop a sense of that. And the same principles apply for, like, if you're painting an environment. If you remember drawing as a kid, let's say, like I remember I would always, you know, draw people in houses and stuff, and fire trucks or whatever. And when you see kids draw, they draw like the mountain, the sun, the cloud, the person, the house, and like every different element is pretty much the same size on the page. Whereas if you kind of start analyzing the way the world looks as you walk through it in your day to day, even if it's, I like to just kind of try and every now and then when I'm sat somewhere, look at my vision completely flatly. So if you're sat on a train, just look at the way people are arranged in the seats, the way the seats look, the light coming through the windows, the background outside, and you'll notice that there's always a kind of dynamic balance and contrast in things. You have interesting focal points in tiny little concentrated areas, and then you have big opens. You know, the chair next to you might be taking up a third of your vision, and then in the same area there's like 10 people clustered in the distance, and like trying to just get a sense of that and put it into your own compositions will like really I think it like helps them look more believable. But at the same time, sometimes it's fun to place figures in like unnaturally stiff poses, or in more symbolic ways. Like I was saying earlier, there really are no rules to how you have to do anything in the end. So yeah, just inspired by Inspired by the human arm. Here's a robot arm. I think I probably should have pushed the fact that it was oversized a bit more. You know, if you're going to do like a big arm, you might as well make it a really big arm. Because if it's a really big arm, people will go, right, she's got a big robot arm. But right now, it's in that territory where someone's going to go like, the idiot made that arm too big. You know, her hand looks a little giant too. But it's better than tiny hands. They always look funny. So I'm often, sometimes it's nice, like line is a fun tool to use, and stylization is one of those questions that's really difficult. You know, there's obviously no correct answer at all, like whether you should, like how stylized things should look, whether you should get rid of all your lines and just have edges, or that's all entirely personal choice on whatever you feel like working on at the moment. As you can see here, I love using the square edge of this charcoal stick to get some like nice hard edges in, and then when you come in and break them up with smudging and everything, you get these. I like strongly believe you can't fake exciting looking mark making. Like if you want it to look, you know, like if you want brushwork or pencil mark to look like it's got clear direction and speed and all of that to it, you have to work fast, and you have to move your brush in interesting ways. It's really hard to fake it. Extending the drop shadow under a jaw. Starting to think more and more about, you know, I'm starting to like the way some of it looks, and just naturally working into materials and values. And I almost never go to, occasionally I'll go straight to a black, but you know, because I want to pick where I put the darkest areas, that's something called keying your drawing, which I guess I'll talk about, which is eventually you have to set the value range that you're working with, and you want to set it early on, and ideally across the whole piece, so that you can build a believable sense of light. You need to treat the subject matter as a whole, not render it too piecemeal and think, where is the absolute darkest place on this drawing and where is the lightest, and then all the relationships between that are going to be easier to figure out. Otherwise, another beginner mistake is to fully render one area, going from black to white, then move on to the next area and fully render black to white, and you end up with I mean, it can be really well handled, like it can be amazing transitions, great textures, but it always bothers me a bit because it kind of flattens the whole drawing, you know, when like the shirt is black and white and the face is black to white. Like I try and make sure all the shadows on the face are just kind of like a medium grey to give that kind of like, you know, sense that it's a lighter material. The darkest area on the skin isn't going to be as dark as the darkest area on a black dress. I mean, you can see that in real life. Yeah. This isn't really the best piece to talk about composition, but I still try and exercise some of the basic rules, you know, and try and group my values in ways that are interesting. As it goes on, I'll separate the dress as a material from the face and the hair and the arm, and the way those shapes work together, you know, in a two-dimensional way is something worth paying attention to. You don't want to accidentally have like tangents or another thing to look out for is that if you could split your whole drawing into three values, black, white and grey, try and have like a dynamic balance between those three shades. So this is like they're big on teaching this in the Russian academies. We had a guest painter called Alexander Novoselov, who is by far the most talented painter I've ever been lucky enough to meet. Real like old school master level. I think he'd been studying for 14 years at the Repin Academy and then teaching there for a while longer, and paints like epic murals in Russia and ceilings in churches and that kind of thing. But he came and gave us a composition workshop, and I mean that's a huge topic to dive into, but it's really important. Like even when you sketch, to try and pay attention to these principles. And one of the things was, like if you can split your work into 3 tones, try not to have an even amount of each. Try not to have like 33% white, 33% black, 33% gray values. It kind of looks stale. You want to pick one of those and have that be the accent. So you might say, I want white on the page to be the like 5%, black like 15%, and then gray the rest. And like that's more exciting to look at. It's too early on to see if I even did anything like that right with this drawing, but hopefully it comes across a bit in some of my other work. His workshops actually made me feel it was funny. It was like, you go into them thinking you like some of your work, and then after a weekend of having him explain and show you all this amazing work, it's really hard to go back to your own and not think like it like literally reset me. I felt like complete novice again. But those moments are good, I think you got to try and search for them. All right. So it's about 50 minutes in now. It's getting sort of like a kind of halfway point. I think from here on out I start to transition more into rendering. As you can see, some of the features have already, like I've smudged a bit of value on the lips just to kind of separate them as a material. The eyelids are looking like they're sort of nice now. There's like a softness on the lower eyelid, and I really kind of put the only hard line on the eye I use is on the upper eyelid, really, which is kind of like a softish dark line, a little bit for the pupil and iris, and then with that direction of light I've got like a little soft L shape, and then try and leave like a nice little white gap that kind of implies the, like the bottom eyelid and the white of the eye is normally a pretty lost edge, unless there's like a strong mascara on, or certain, lighting situations would be different. But for a kind of soft, this isn't a very direct light. I haven't done very crisp cast shadows. They get a little more defined, but this could easily be sort of like a light from a window or just whatever. And it's one of those people floating on a page kind of drawings, so the light can come from wherever you want. It's good to try different things a lot. The kind of light source you have strongly affects how you render it. I mean, most people know like brighter lights tend to have, I wonder if you can hear that playing. Brighter lights tend to have crisper shadows, especially like the nearer you are to a light source, the harder the shadows will be. So these kind of like diffuse, I'm a really big fan of like diffuse light, like light on a rainy day or something. I think it's really soft and interesting, and it puts a big emphasis on the value of the materials. If you look at someone, standing in very soft natural light, the biggest contrast is normally between the various materials they have on the color of the clothing, the color of their skin, the color of, like the background they're in, just all of these different things. Materials kind of take center stage. And then if you're doing someone in like very harsh sunlight, it increases the contrast across all the materials, and I think often it creates like more interesting, like jagged, sharp shapes for the light, which is cool. Just entirely, once again, like decide everything based on that initial thought, and having that initial thought is really hard. Like more and more as time goes on, I'm finding it's not about like executing something. Like you can learn to handle almost any technical problem. especially if you work with really modern workflow. You know, if you want to use 3D, you want to use photo bashing, anything like that. You know, as much as people like to bitch, like, using those techniques doesn't it doesn't make anything any easier. I've never really tried using it in client or personal work. You know, I probably should, just for the sake of keeping up to date, but I don't really see how it makes anything easier, because I've never found that actually painting or actually drawing something, the execution of it is difficult, but it's got nothing on thinking of the thing you're going to do and thinking of the composition. You know, like, that is always the hardest part. I mean, that whole argument is redundant in my opinion. Like, even if you want to argue that it makes anything easier, then it's easier for everyone, and surely now the standards for what people can achieve are higher, you know? Like, if it's so easy, then you should be producing something really special. Anyway, it's a pointless argument, but I mean, I think a big part of my reason for liking pencils is just I love knowing the tools to do, like, whatever you want, you know, like a truly infinite possibilities when you stare at a page. You can carry with you, like, anywhere, and you can just do it easily, and I like the simplicity of it. Probably a little afraid of color. But even then, you know, like, when you start with a blank page, the mindset I like to try and get in to be really creative is to try and forget, try to lose, like, if you're really stuck for an idea, try and lose any preconceptions of what it has to be. Like, don't worry about what you should do, what you need to be working on. Don't worry about what your portfolio needs. I mean, sometimes you have to worry about those things, but it can be really refreshing to open a sketchbook and look at that page and, like, really sit and think that anything could be on here. Like, it's an infinite possibilities. So, like, learning how to think like that and how to think creatively is so much harder than the actual drawing side of things, which, you know, when you get into, like, a nice flow state, and you've a few years of practice in, is really quite enjoyable. I always get stuck on the what rather than the how, because the how can be broken into questions. You know, it can be broken into things that you can answer very easily. You can go in and find, like, I want to paint this material from this light source. There's, like, a definitive answer to that. You could shoot a reference, you could study up on how that material works and make a really educated guess. But what you can't ever get a definitive answer to is the what. There's no reason any drawing is a more correct drawing than anything else, you know, and that's kind of intimidating, and exciting. That's what the... But obviously, sometimes you don't feel that. Sometimes you're just looking at a piece of paper and it just, you know, it just looks like a boring, mundane piece of paper and a pencil, and that, like, magic isn't there. So just go for a walk and try and get in a good headspace. I'm saying all this while painting it, while drawing something completely generic, but I think the advice still holds true. But at the same time, you know, like, it can be good not to, like, just don't bully yourself as well. Like, if all you feel like drawing is, like, the basics, you know, you just want to draw dragons, mechs, goblins, or girls in dresses, or, like, ripped firemen, like, whatever you want to do, just do it. There's when you actually get into it and start exploring a concept, there's so many variables that go into making a drawing that you're never going to do anything that is completely unoriginal. And as long as you do it honestly, you know, as long as you don't directly plagiarize someone else, really it should be about the experience of you having to solve those problems. You know, there might have been a million whatever drawn before, but this might be your first time, and that's like completely valid. It's way more fun if you like validate your own experience as meaningful. You know, like if you wanna be you wanna draw like a Conan the Barbarian with a sword. It doesn't matter if there's been a million Frazetta ripoffs. It's like this is your first one. Nice bit of elbow there. Yeah, I mean, I don't really recommend. If you're going to work on an easel, normally you just want to get a piece of paper and tape it to a board. This doesn't really work that well, and I normally just would draw with it in my lap or whatever, but I couldn't find any way to set the camera up then. Playing a nose shot still, taking up precious space. Obsessing over those eyes. This is interesting for me. I have never watched back myself. I never watched myself back working in pencil. It's as much of a mystery. I tend to leave, like the area around our left arm is a mess, but like I was saying earlier, getting stuck is worse than. Sometimes like I just go, well, you know, I'll keep working on this area and let that tick over in my head. It might seem more obvious later, and if sometimes I'll draw really loose lines several times over one area, and the way the like contours overlap and build up, you'll come back and look at it, and like some sort of weird Rorschach blob test, it'll suddenly look like the thing. You'll just see like in there between a few of your ghosts, you're like, that's how it should look. And always easier than blank paper. There's not much your mind can do with white. It's just the void. Looking at this now, I think I've literally drawn this face from this angle with that hair like 10 times. So I don't know if there's any conclusion to that. I think it at least gets better. I mean, that's one thing to remember too, is the internet is incredibly helpful for getting feedback from other people, and in a sense, like, you know, like I feel like I owe everything to it. Feedback online was a huge part of me even getting into drawing, like knowing what to study, like the whole thing. You know, it's kind of weird to think about what I would be doing without it, but at the same time, and more now than ever before, there are sort of like weird constraints from it too. Like, if you go back and look at, if you're ever lucky enough to be at a museum that shows like initial drawings and sketches and stuff for big paintings, you'll see artists draw the same subject matter like weird amounts of times. They'll you know, when there was no alternative, if you were thumbnailing, you would you'd draw it once in pencil, and then you'd do a slightly bigger one in pencil, and then you'd do a little oil rough, and then you'd do a bigger oil rough. And I mean, there's a Swedish artist called Julius Kronberg who has a studio in Stockholm, and it's filled with like his working, all his oil thumbnails, and he would like repaint the same scene at like a good A4 size, you know, twice as big as this drawing, and he would repaint the scene with different seasons, different costumes, different time of year, like, and each time tweaking it, and then at the end there would be a massive, you know, finished version of it. And I used to feel bad if I felt like I'd done something before. But more and more recently, I realized I didn't actually feel bad about that. The thing that made me feel bad was that I was like, oh no, when I put this online, people will just think they've already seen it. And that's like, not a good way to think, you know. It's too dependent on on trying to impress other people rather than trying to actually do something. You know, maybe there's a reason you keep obsessing on this subject, because in theory there is some, like when you look back on artists when they're dead, you know, we like know like 10 paintings by them on average, I'd guess, if that. You know, a lot of people know like probably 10 paintings from art history in total. Quantity and like seeing huge amounts of stuff is really interesting in real time. Like, it's great following someone who has like an active Instagram or something, but in hindsight, when everything's said and done, like, what gets remembered, not that I'm like one of those people who's a big freak about how important it is to be remembered, but what stands out as being, you know, like that really inspiring work, you don't care if you find out they did 15 versions of it beforehand, you know. So just do whatever's coming naturally. Maybe you're working towards something. Yeah, that just made a big difference. I put the background in using the square, attacking it with finger as well. The textures that come out are, you know, in some sense completely unplanned. That's just what happens when you use those materials fast. I really wanted to start to define like the head. I wanted to get like a glowing effect around the head, so I started putting in some real dark accents. So I guess this is where I'm like officially keying the drawing. I'm setting a darkest and a lightest point, and you know what, working out how that hair is gonna look. So drawing little negative spaces and then coming in, you know, like I like to squish my kneadable eraser into a little fin, and then you can kind of use that to it won't make the page white, but it'll bring out interesting shapes, and the way you twist your hand and then rework into it, you can, you know, end up with some nice effects. But yeah, confident marks look confident. Sounds really obvious, kind of a redundant sentence, but I always used to try and fake it, try and, you know, and I guess some people can, but I think if things look, you know, to look dynamic, you've got to work that way. If I was going to work on this for any more time, I'd probably I like moleskins because they're kind of too small to really smudge that badly, but you can just stick a little piece of paper under the palm of your hand if that's a problem you have a lot. It's not normally an issue until you get further into something and there's more lead on the page, and then it can become really annoying. Cast shadows are huge as well, so I'm starting to put one in here behind the hair, give the hair a sense of volume, the hair and the head, and yeah, I'm using kind of like nice big, if you kind of work quickly with the pencil like that in like group big blocks of line, it's kind of like, to me it feels analogous to putting brush strokes down, because I think about them as like square marks, and yeah, it contrasts nicely with the finer handled areas. A little bit of an occlusion shadow there under the neck, letting it get darker as, you know, less bounced light can reach those areas, because obviously she's got her upper chest and neck has light falling on it, which is going to reflect light up onto her neck and hair. So I don't want to go in there and put like a black shadow in. I mean, you could, it wouldn't fit the kind of ambience I want to aim for. Yeah, look at that. That page is moving all over the place. It's very annoying working with that easel. Not blowing anyone's mind with the robot arm here. It's just sort of very Crisis / Metal Gear Solid / you know, everyone. But it's so fun to do, getting those synthetic muscles in. If you're a complete beginner, my advice would be learn anatomy first, or learn perspective first, depending on whether you're more drawn towards environments or people. Like eventually you'll want to study both, but those would be two obvious points, because it's quite overwhelming to take on everything at once. You know, that never really, I mean, like, one of the things, like an important thing to say is, like, I don't think it ever gets easy for people. It just becomes more and more manageable. But those are 2 points that if you want to just get early on, because they're so fundamental. I mean, being a human being, I have a bias towards drawing other humans, and so, like, but in the process of learning anatomy, you have to learn how to draw anatomy, and so you'll subconsciously pick up on a lot of other drawing principles. If you start doing some photo studies, you'll be learning a bit about values, and you'll be learning how to handle medium better. But just getting, like the beginning, you just have to go a little crazy. Think about, it's like, you know, when you get, like, for me, I would always think about this. When I was way younger, I was really, really into video games, and if I bought a new game, it didn't matter how hard it was to play. I didn't set like a study routine. I wouldn't sit down and look at the controls and like think every morning I will study the controls and this is fundamental gameplay. Like, you just, because it's fun, you just do it over and over again. And eventually something sticks out. You find you're naturally good at some game or some point, and then you start seeing people who are better, and you think, why are they better than me? And then it builds up naturally. But at no point, if you can find it fun, learning is really, really satisfying. And I think it's got to be the same with art. You don't pick up a game and try and beat like the best. What you do is you pick it up and you just try and fall in love with playing it. And I think the same is with drawing. You just gotta, like, oh, why have I turned to my face? What is going on? Okay. Should have watched this back first. Yeah, you gotta just try and like feverishly get into drawing in the same way you would something else. So like, drop the expectation. It doesn't like matter how old you are, how smart you think you are, how good you think you should be, whether people have told you you're good, or whether you've like tried to get into drawing before and fucked up and stopped doing it. Like, ignore all of that and just think about it like it was your favorite thing to do in the world, whether it was like learning a new hobby. Like, just every day, just like pick it up. Like, you wake up in the morning and don't think like, today I'm going to be the best at drawing. Instead, you're just like, today, it'd be a really fun way to spend some time would be to spend a few hours drawing. And then you do it and you try and like think about what an interesting experience it is to be, sat there in a human nervous system trying to draw things. It's really quite weird. It's pretty fun, like when you don't let expectation ruin it. So wow, a pixel just died on my screen in real time. Fascinating. What did I spit? I spat on my screen. Well, there you go. So I'm trying to do that still. Like different problems creep in. Like I constantly find my ego, trying to fuck shit up. Like it comes back. You've done a few things you like before, or maybe for me, because I've done some longer studies at school, you get complacent. You're like, oh, I spent hundreds of hours on that. I should know how to paint good by now. It's like a meaningless thing. Like, you have to be present when you draw. You have to just be dealing with the problems of your current drawing. You can't think about where you should be at, how it should be going. And like, even now, that it probably like bothers me now more than it ever used to. There's like a spoiled brat inside that like wants wants attention, wants things to be good, and just constantly trying to just fall in love with actually drawing again is the best. And for me, that's why I've been doing this huge piece recently. It's hard to photograph. I can't really get it to look good when I put it online anywhere, and it's taking way longer than feels like. I keep waking up and thinking, shit, maybe should I be doing a job? Should I be doing something else? And I'm trying to take all of that discomfort as a sign that I'm probably doing something that is actually helping me. So yeah, you just saw here a bunch. I actually used the corner of a square piece of graphite just to get like little shadows in on the hair, to get a little texture on it. Those kind of imply, maybe if it's wavy, the side getting caught in the shadow, and then I can go in and smudge them a little bit on the whole fringe. I'm trying to don't think about hair in terms of hairs. Or do if you want. Some people do that really nicely, but I like to think of it as a sort of weird series of forms, and then right at the end you can go in and imply the actual hairs with some marks. But think about how it's waving and interweaving and sometimes just moving the pencil along in a kind of wavy fashion, and overlapping lines, and then coming in and finding some of those overlaps and putting a little shadow accent in. Like that. I deal with that a lot in making like organic looking textures. Some of those strange blobs of flowing flesh in some of my drawings are like really not very planned at all. You just come in and like it's almost like the design on them is a reflection of the way my wrist moves naturally. So I like to think of it like, to get that kind of organic, biological looking, something that looks like it grew, I'm like using the actual mechanics of my arm and wrist, and how it kind of flows if I try and draw across the paper, and thinking maybe that'll somehow like reflect in the actual shapes I've made. That sounds really crazy now that I've tried to say it out loud, but it seems to work, I suppose. Yeah, I added a cigarette because I don't know. I thought it made it look like some kind of bizarre waitress on a. I don't even know. It's a dumb idea, but the smoke was like a fun effect to try and play around with too. Like I was saying earlier, like leaving plenty of soft edges, loads undefined. I've started to imply that dress is going to be darker than. There's kind of like a messy area where the hair meets it, where I still need to go in and figure out where those two meet, which is going to be a nice area because that's like a good chance to use interesting negative spaces. The way the hair will fall on the dress is going to leave interesting patterns, and I like coming up with things like that give you a chance. Like, try and think of complicated light effects that you could pull off, and I think that'll like challenge you to get better. So if you're drawing something made out of stone, you might think, oh, the way the light will be raking across here will give a really strong texture, and then I could have a vine growing on it as well, and maybe it's above a puddle so the whole thing's reflected. And now you've come up with like a ridiculously complicated thing to try and tackle, and but you can just work it out piece by piece, look up a few references, and that stuff's fun. I normally don't think of when I look at like the finished result and think about what people or what I am happy about. Quite often the like gimmick that sold the drawing I didn't really think of until I was like quite far through. So yeah, just blocking in a bit more of her. Yeah, I guess it's a dress. I probably could have like made it into an apron too. That would have been pretty cool. Someone said on Facebook it looks like a steampunk dress with a cyberpunk arm. So yeah, I don't know. It's probably more like rushed design, but design's interesting. You have to. I need to tackle it more. I mean, in a sense, there's a lot of design in some of my drawings. There's a lot of designing pattern and designing, like textures and the way the actual drawing will be laid out. But in terms of designing clothing and context and story, I think that's probably the weakest point in the things that I do. Something I should take on, but it's fun in the same way, in that you get to take your mind in interesting directions. What time period is this set in? Who is she? What's her job? I mean, if you really think about the people you pass on the street, and like the reasons can become as detailed as you like. Like, it doesn't just have to be like, oh, it's an Aztec person. Go on Google and Google like Aztec, and then look at the first drawing and think, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, within their society, there would have been social castes, there would have been fashion trends, there would have been, and then you can come up with a fictional society. I mean, I loved Mobius for this. His people always look like they're wearing clothes that were like fashionable and out there within their own entirely separate universe. He's like taking you to his own. It just looks so believable. You can I don't know, think about taking like some kid wearing like from any different like fashion scene, and then imagine that you didn't have the upbringing of the culture you're in to like understand why he's wearing his jeans at that height, or like why is he cuffed the bottom of his jeans, and he's not wearing socks and he's wearing boat shoes. If you ever went to school in England, that's all everyone wore. Like or like just shit like that. Like, that's what I want to put into my work more. I think that's what's missing. And that's like, once again, you can use any method you want, like Photobash 3D. Like, none of those problems get easier with the different tools. Those are more the kind of problems you're going to be solving if you want to work in concept art. I mean, but I think even if you want to be a fine artist, or you just want to do your own work, like, those questions still need to be asked in different ways. I guess the end goal for me would is it the end goal? But I feel like it would be nice to feel like you could ask me about any choice on a page, and I could give you an interesting answer for why I made that choice. Even if it's something like, why have you rendered it in this style? Why have you chosen this value range? It's like putting some intention in it. That's the thing about like really good work. It's just like thick with intention. Like, there's nothing that's an accident. Or if there's an accident, it's an accident for a good reason, So to me, I find this kind of stage one of the most fun bits now, because if you step back and look at this is the kind of time where you can say, I'm basically not going to change anything in a massive way now. At least I think I'd pretty much decided that by now. Now I can drop the anxiety that it's going to turn into nothing, like drop and just focus on like executing it in an interesting way. There's still a lot I could do with the arm here. I'm reworking this edge on the hair. There should be a hierarchy to your edges in the same way there is in your values. Like when I was talking about keying your values and picking a darkest point and a lightest point. It's good to try and do the same with your edges. Like, there has to be a sharpest edge. Like, don't think in like just hard and soft. Like, it should be as subtle as your values are. Like, you don't just say things are. I mean, you can draw in black and white, but it's nice with your edges if you want to make things look a little more realistic by saying, think about how close they are to the light source. What's the material made of? With hair, like, if you really wanted, you could probably go in, and I'm not sure I could pull it off now because of how much. Oh, I'm yawning. because of how because of how much value I've put in, it would be difficult to go in and say like have individual hairs being picked out, but maybe that would have been something cool. That might be something you have to plan before you put any background value in, and go in really carefully and draw the little negative spaces between hairs or whatever. But you can kind of imply a similar thing by just doing a softer edge, because it's the same, it's like saying there's multiple edges here, but instead here's a big soft one. Getting kind of aggressive with the paper there. The fringe was like something I think I decided would be a nice textural focal point. So going in and putting in little cast shadows behind the tufts of hair, and yeah, being more exact with that. As a kind of visual effect I quite like in the background, you'll notice I've like tried to leave some of the square points and marks really obvious, and then a sort of like in a circular fashion smudged and erased the negative spaces around the bottom of the page. That's another one. That's like one of those weird things. Like I couldn't give a reason why. So I think like using intuition is important, and developing it. And I guess you probably develop it by just looking at more of the stuff you like. There's no like objective best stuff to look at, but find all the things you like and immerse yourself in them. And I think you start to intuitively develop your taste and like how to pull that off as well. Like there are loads. It's probably like a mixture of mark making from loads of drawings I've seen and liked, and preferences about texture, and there's the background could be a flat value, and it maybe it would even read more realistically, but for whatever reason I just felt like having it more like this, though I'm sure as it goes on I expand it outwards and fill more of the page in so that she pops out a little more. You'll see there I was trying to tweak the contour of the nose and figure out maybe if there were some areas where I didn't want like a solid line behind it. Maybe if her nose passed in front of its shadow from that angle, there would be like a little partial break in the line, but it didn't look quite right. You can tweak things like that forever, and it's those little differences that will give your faces their own unique personalities. Not that mine have unique personalities, it's the same face over and over again, probably because when it comes to decisions like that I'm making similar ones. Yeah, it's a big part of it though. Especially when you think about how small this face is, it's probably like a thumb's width across, like the tip of my thumb across or something. Like a little tiny nudge in the line might represent like her eye being half a centimeter in either direction if she were life size, and that's a big difference on a face. We're really really programmed to recognize the differences in faces more than anything else. I was just listening to a Radiolab where they talk about a man who has face blindness, and he gives this analogy where they said, so what's it like? He'll meet the same people and he just can't, there's no part of his brain dedicated to processing faces, so he can meet you 5 minutes later and not know he's ever met you from face alone. And he said it's like if you went to a park and looked at a tree, you're looking at the tree, you can see what the tree looks like, you could list details about it, you could stand there and say, oh look, that branch is whatever, but if you went through the whole park and saw 1,000 trees and came back, you wouldn't just always remember a tree by how it looks, the bark on it or something. And in the same way our faces are the same, like we have all this stuff to like recognize the tiny little ratios between different features on our face and the way the cheekbone and jaw and eyes look, and we do it all subconsciously. So it's a good thing we do that, or it'd be quite difficult. Though he seems like he was very happy. Yeah, softening edges again, trying to get some movement in the lines. Not that they're actually moving. I wonder what that means more specifically. I guess movement is kind of like a way of saying it looks like there was movement in the brush stroke that caused it, you know, like it's like documented the way my hand was moving and lets you know it was moving kind of fast, and yeah, I don't know what that adds. It's a style preference again. You can do whatever you want. It's amazing portraits in all kinds of different approaches. So here I'm being kind of cheeky, and I don't feel like I was getting a little lazy about drawing this hand, so I figured if I kind of just went in and approached it how I would in paint. So I kind of roughly blocked in the negative spaces around the fingers and then went in with a pencil and just kind of drew them in. And despite the fact that I obviously I got some graphite down in areas that would, where the fingers were going to be, it kind of naturally gave them a texture from the beginning, and I could go in and figure out where I needed to erase more often. Doing the same with the cigarette there, drawing it out as a negative space and around the smoke. Doing those little fast bursts of rendering. Yeah, it's once again like it's kind of like doing a brush stroke, because you end up with a sort of square block and you can set the width and length, and after a while of doing it, you'll just kind of get practiced at how that feels. I've been thinking recently about because one of those things that people always say is like, you know, you draw with your head, not with your hands or with your tools, which is true. Like, you know, obviously you the drawing takes place, and all the useful thinking really takes place in your head, but there is, like I was saying earlier, like how a medium will influence how you work. I mean, even your hand is kind of part of the medium. If you switched hands or held the pencil in your mouth or whatever, you'll end up with very different results too. So I've heard a lot of people going on about how if you learn to draw left-handed or in your non-dominant hand, it actually makes you better with your dominant hand as well. I'm saying this now, and I will probably never do this. I'd like to. It's just one of those things I'll forever say I'd like to do, I think. You'll see I've kind of there's kind of like a core shadow across her fringe. You see the little dark blobs that define where her hair is changing direction. It kind of naturally puts some bounce light where it makes the fringe have more volume, because where it's turning back towards us, I'm suggesting light is bouncing and hitting it, and the actual darkest point is what's called the terminator, which is the point where the shadow is changing, because that's where it's neither in the light nor receiving any bounced light. And you'll see that a lot in various lighting situations, and it's a good one to get used to doing. Don't overdo it, you'll make everyone look like the Silver Surfer, which you see a lot in like beginner figure drawings at school, which is called over modeling, or Silver Surfer syndrome, as they used to call it in the 19th century. But that's where everything has a strong terminator, and you keep the bounce light like literally as bright as the highlights, which happens a lot on materials like silver, obviously. Yeah, filling the page in here. I don't know why, I just like to do it really aggressively. There's no anger issues or anything, it's just more fun that way. I'm really impatient about filling in backgrounds, especially after doing so many in charcoal at school. It takes a long time to fill in a nice even tone on one of those big charcoal drawings, and it's like, depending on who you are, it might be fun. It's not that fun for me. it's helped a bit. But if you squint, I might as well talk about what squinting down is. People do it in two different ways. I think the sort of classic way is you know, shut your eyes a little bit so you're looking almost through your eyelashes. You're reducing the amount of light coming into your eyes, and by reducing that and by putting it out of focus, your brain sees more fundamental, broader information about the subject. So if you do it now and look at my drawing, you'll see that there's actually no distinct, like the hair melts into the dress. There's areas on, say, the robot arm that are lacking it. There's just obvious points that are lacking information, and you can see that. I mean, you can see a sense of where the light's coming from. There's kind of some little blobs where her eyes are, but it's a good way of telling what's missing, because the idea is as you squint down further and further. You can also do it if you know how to just unfocus your eyes. It's kind of like starting to go cross-eyed. If you just kind of squeeze those muscles a little bit, I find everything blurs, and you get a similar effect. And as you squint or blur, like, start noticing, if you're drawing from life, the kind of things you're looking for are like, as I squint down, what's the last edge I can still see? So you might have like all these different edges, and you're staring into the shadows, and it's like maybe it's a vase, and you can see the drawing in the shadow, but as soon as you squint down a little bit, the shadow blends together into one big mass. And then you keep looking, and like maybe right at the end you think the one edge I can still see is that like edge of the vase right near the lamp, and so that's now the most important one on your drawing, and you give that the sharpest edge and the most contrast. But you can do it with imagination drawings, because you can squint down and think like, does it still look how you want it to look when you do that? Like, are the right areas still coming forward? Can you still read what it is? Because if you can't, or things look weird, then that's like a really good way of telling what was up. Like, I was doing it and I thought, hey, her head's not casting any shadow, that looks really flat, so I came in with this really dark shadow now. And then when you squint down now, it's more obvious which direction the light's coming from. I also thought I should put a big cast shadow under that arm, and I think I started to put some, I already have a little bit actually around, say, like her hair on her neck, so it gives that kind of interesting shape. I said shape very aggressively there. Right. This is probably descending into the tedious world of tweaking fairly soon, where you just can't tell how finished you want to make it. You know, from here there's still so much you could do. I could commit to a bigger value range and, like, you know, block the background in more and say I want more values on the face, and then I'm gonna have to really push the values on the dress, and, you know, to try and maintain the contrast I wanted. Or I could say, I want to go in and like really design this arm. I want to make it look like it could be used by a 3D modeler, or you know, it could be made into a sculpture, or like it's functional, or you know, like maybe I could put her in an environment in like a bar. You could suggest some ceiling lights, or like an outdoors area, like, you know, you can go on forever. But I was just trying to, I decided I'd be happy to stop with it when the first impression was interesting, when you would kind of just look at it and think, you know, oh, okay, there it is. Like, you know, there's kind of a point you reach where it's like you can look in and see things that are wrong, but the first read works, and that's like quite often where I'll take a sketch. It's like if you went in and you asked me, like, you know, like I remember now at the end of this drawing, like her robot arm really it's not really finished at all. Like, it's not very well modeled. It doesn't have a good sense of light on the bicep. It looks a little flat and stuff like that. But the first read was working well enough. Yeah, there's always a next level you can take stuff to. Recently I've been obsessed with any artist who can just kind of take you into their own complete looking world, you know, their own alternate dimension, whether that's someone like Mobius, who looks like he went around making cartoons from some alternate Dune-like desert dimension, or there's people like Ernst Fuchs, or that, oh, who do I really, you know, someone like Klimt, or these people have like their own fully developed sense of aesthetics. Nothing is trying to be realistic, though it uses you know, major tools from realism, whether it's realistic sense of light to a certain extent, or very technical drawing, but at the same time it doesn't have to look like something that you could believably go see out in the street, you know, in your day-to-day reality. And just that kind of that completeness that you sort of know when you see it is what I'd like to try and chase, but it's very hard to do. Yeah, but it's like in some sense, you know, the potential of a blank piece of paper, I really like, you can't like understate how exciting that can be. You know, like when you start drawing, in theory, anything that could possibly be represented in graphite is a potential end result, including like a drawing that looks like a copy of a photo of you at a party that might happen 20 years from now but doesn't, or a realistic landscape from an alien planet that literally does exist, not that you'd ever know, or everyone that doesn't exist, or what you're seeing exactly in your room right now but with like tiny little gnomes everywhere. These are all completely arbitrary examples, but I mean, like, really it can be anything. So just don't try and place a limit on what it should be. You know, reserve some time to see what comes out of your head when you're completely open to just drawing whatever. You know, and quite often if you're doing something and you get nervous that people who already know your work will think it's weird, that probably means you're doing something interesting for yourself, because it's always going to feel a little uncomfortable to do something new. Some of my favorite things that I've done were like just ideas that happened at really weird times, and like letting go and just learning to like just, you know, like never dismiss something as being a waste of time. Like most people would happily spend 20 minutes watching some YouTube videos that, you know, like ultimately won't change your life that much. And in the same 20 minutes, you could thumbnail out something that like maybe one day is like the most interesting thing you did, you know. So like don't try and be open to not dismissing ideas immediately. Keep a little sketchbook where, you know, if you have some ridiculous thought that comes into your head, or some image or some idea that you think you could express, or a costume design, or you see someone in the street and the light was just perfect, just like drop everything and just think, I can spare 15 minutes just to get this down in a rudimentary form, you know, because those like moments of insight are impossible to repeat. I mean, you'd have to restart the whole universe to end up with you in the same road with the same people walking around you with the same thoughts bubbling in your mind, you know what I mean? Like, it's never gonna happen again. So I'm trying like make myself really want to like capture those things. Okay, it went blank for a minute, but it's fine. I believe this is the final 20-minute clip, so this is kind of the finishing touches stage. Made her tricep a little thicker. I thought I wanted to make her a little more uncomfortably robot swole. I wonder if like a real robot arm would actually, like, you would bother making a tricep. I always think about that, like how much of our anatomy is redundant if you can replace it. I mean, yeah, I don't know, I'm not qualified to answer that. There's probably people who spend all their time trying to think about things like that with prosthetics. That's one of the overwhelming things about design and art that can frustrate me sometimes. I don't know if other people feel this, but like to make truly convincing concepts takes a lot of time. Like anything you could think to draw, if you actually looked at why it should look the way it does and the information you need to learn, I mean, you'll literally be looking at subjects that other people are spending their whole lives researching. You want to draw a robot arm, like there's a guy out there whose whole life is staying up to date on prosthetics. Or if you're doing like a historical looking piece, there's probably there's always going to be someone who could pick apart why your Viking never existed and looks completely ridiculous. So concept art is pretty, like, done well, is really challenging because you have to be able to balance like the thing that opened my eyes to this, to put it in perspective, was like meeting the EA DICE team based in Stockholm, and they would come into school and give little lectures sometimes, and they would show some of the concept art for games like Battlefield. And I remember naively thinking before, like, well, it's just soldiers that exist, so like, how hard can the concept art be? Which is a really naive thought, because like the level of balancing what actually looks good, what plays well with gameplay, like all of these different things, like, is a hugely complicated task. So maybe if that's what you want to follow, it might be more helpful to find a project that you can put a little more time into and sink a little deeper into, because if you want to like really do good design work, it can't just be like, I drew a Viking today, tomorrow I drew like someone from the Spanish Civil War, and the next day I drew an Egyptian. Like, you're never going to get deep enough. Yeah, or maybe you will. I don't know. Maybe you're way better at it than me. But I've always, I'm more drawn towards, like, people say you should draw what you want to see, and I try and do that as like unashamedly as possible, even if it does look occasionally redundant. I'm hoping the idea is, in the long run, it'll let me like find a voice that I really like, artistically or whatever. But at the same time, I don't want to, it's like figuring out what part of that is good thinking and which part of that is laziness. I've always personally liked doing a little freelance work on the side, because being forced to solve someone else's problems is like, lets me do my own work in a more guilt-free setting. Not that there should be any guilt, I mean, that is ridiculous, but something about knowing that I spent the day tackling problems that I didn't decide on myself, like, lets me feel like I'm learning in that sense, and then I'm more open to just doing whatever I want to do on my own stuff. So yeah, I had to keep lifting that easel up just to make sure it was looking nicer on the page. So yeah, putting some graphite down, smudging it with a eraser, rubbing it with my thumb, like it's got some movement to it. Hatching and line is a really interesting visual effect. It's a shame the way I set the camera up doesn't quite capture all of that, but I hope you still get an idea of how I work. You can see little bursts of vertical lines across the clothing, where sometimes it's kind of like, I don't know what to call it, like naive mark making. Like, sometimes I like to go in and like make every surface look kind of like flawless and smooth, and then other times it's fun just to be like, I'm literally just gonna scribble and bring the value down by scribbling, and like leave it looking scribbled but have the value be correct, and then and then contrast that with other areas. And I personally find that fun to do. Here I started to actually look at the negative spaces on the hair, and that starts to like separate the dress a little more. Probably trying to like really, I say really too much. When I use a hard eraser on the back of one of my pencils when I like want to use one. I try not to use it too much, but even letting that get a little dirty, it kind of leaves interesting edges behind it too. Much in the same way, eventually you stop, like a lot of people move away from just using a round brush. Like that's a good way of learning in Photoshop, and then you start using other brushes and sort of letting that like random accidents happen more. There are like big analogies for traditional medium, like sometimes just be a little looser with the tools, like let the tool leave a weird edge, anything like that, you know. It's gonna look cool, it's gonna be fun. Little, trying to get that hair flowing. You'll see interlocking ridges, but still, like some of those marks were me thinking, you know, if I saw this from life, I would expect a hard edge on the hand. I just feel like I feel like there would be a hard edge. So even though I know the hair is light in value, I go in and I make the edge darker next to the hand and next to the arm, and then kind of blend it out and see if that works, you know, see if that looks weird or if that works. And a lot of like the final stages of rendering is doing stuff like that. It's like redefining some edges and then going in and like fully losing some of the softer ones. And you'll see like in between, say, the curled fingers on the hand, there's like no information about the other shoulder. I just left it, I think I just leave it blank in the end. I just liked how that looks, you know, it makes you look at the hand more. Here I'm trying to get that light on the arm a bit more, looking at the dress, going, you know, like the shadows on the dress are like full black, whereas on her face they're a light grey. That like really helps pull the materials apart, which is important. It's cosmically important that your materials don't look the same. It's universally important. Yeah. Would you look at that? I'm running out of things to say. It's coming up towards the end of this. This is I try and work. Yeah, I guess I'm moving pretty quickly here. Trying to use intuition again. Just keep looking at it. You know, when you've been working on something for 2 hours solid, it's not always a good idea to just call it finished there at the end, because you have, I mean, like, what is that sensation of I want this to be finished? Like, that's a weird thought. That's like your mind getting in the way, because it's utterly meaningless. This is like a drawing that, especially if it's a big project, it's like, this is a project that no one ever goes back to work, especially traditional work, once they've said it's finished. I don't know why, it just feels so wrong. It feels like you've lost the mindset or whatever. But yeah, that thought, like, oh, you know, I've got to get it finished now, can be a weird one, because it's completely meaningless. It's completely blinding as well. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm keep trying to like create the sensation in my head of first look. Like, just keep thinking, I've just looked at this, I've just sat down, this isn't my drawing. Like, one of the things that God, I'm so sick of saying the word drawing, and my accent makes it sound really weird. One of the things I would notice when I was asked to do some critiquing when I was at school, for some of the first years, and it's so much easier to critique someone else's drawing, because in the same way, like earlier on when I was saying, when you look at a face, you don't see it unfiltered, you know, there's all this filtering to help you recognize a face. I think as you work on a piece of as you work on a piece, you actually build up filtering. You build up senses of like, oh no, this area was difficult, don't want to have to redo that, or this is the good bit, like this bit's done. Like those are all very abstract thoughts that you are stopping you from actually seeing how the thing looks. And if you sit there and then just kind of finish it, often it's that, it's the same reason why when you flip it, it always looks weird, or you come back the next day and it either looks better or worse, because if you're a person who's really hard on yourself, you probably just build up just deep layers of hate. Like you work on it for 2 hours and you just build up like, I'm a fucking failure, I can't do this shit, like, and like, once again, that's not a rational look. That's not you seeing the work. It's not any more true. Like being unnecessarily hard on yourself isn't any more honest than being unnecessarily like bigging yourself up and saying you're the best. They're both just ways of not actually looking at the thing. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's very easy to critique work when it's not yours, because you see it objectively. You don't have a story. This is a drawing. What does this drawing need? What's it lacking? And like how and then how qualified am I to make those changes? And you want to like be able to do the same with your own work. You want to be able to think, it doesn't matter how long I've worked on it, how difficult it was. Sometimes it does if it's client work. This is all like, ideal situation. But yeah, all of those are meaningless thoughts. Just try and see it for what it is. Get up, take a break, look at it in a mirror, go for a walk, stop thinking about it consciously. I'm sure it's still ticking away somewhere in your brain, but just like, that's a really good advice for something that has to be for someone else, is just give it a night's sleep and look at it the next day, and you'll often be way more open to doing more work on it. When I first started drawing, the big thing that I used to do, I only really knew about like character art, and so my goal when I was like 14 or something was just like, I want to draw a character every day in pencil. So I would just like, try and do a daily one. And drawing from imagination like that, like in the first year, my results got a lot better, and they got much better than I actually, probably my understanding got better, because in the first few months you get better really quickly, because you actually learn how to take time and how to approach it. You learn like not to just stop as soon as it looks shit. You learn to go back and like, adjust things, and like those are good habits to keep. And a big part of sketching from your head, definitely. If you can just sit down and just pump out a perfect drawing, which there are people who can do, scarily enough, but you don't have to be a savant. Is that a word? We'll never know, but it would be nice, I'm sure. I'm inclined to think that's all experience and confidence. Confidence goes a big way. A long way, a big way. Yeah. So I think I try, when I take something like this and put it online, I try not to, I'll usually adjust the values a little bit online, but at the same time, like it is important to me that if someone came and saw my work in real life one day, they're not just going to be like, what the fuck? Like it's important that they have impact and they work in real life. And I try and sit with like natural light coming from my left hand side, so I'm not casting any shadow on the work. It tends to let the blacks be nice and dark, and you can get a lot of contrast out of them, but there's nothing wrong with adjusting your values online either. That's just, like if you wanted to work in pencil as an illustrator, that's just an important part of making the final product more presentable. Like there is no cheating in art apart from plagiarism. Like I honestly don't believe there's any cheating, because if it, more and more it's becoming apparent everyone takes shortcuts, and when everyone can take any shortcut, that just raises, it's like the Olympics where everyone's roided up, it just raises the standard for human performance. Like top Olympic athletes aren't unimpressive because they're all on performance enhancing drugs. It's kind of a weird metaphor for like using references in 3D paintovers or whatever, but it is a similar thing. I would only, it's not a similar thing though, because no one's dishonest about it, but it's the same thing where you can't, like, very few people will be able to deliver like that quality with that speed and that, like, just finesse in a day. Like, don't worry, like, everyone else out there is a human being too. Like, no one is, like, you have the main tool which is needed, which is a human brain. Everything else is just ways of expressing the potential of that thing. So just don't obsess about what they're using. Just how can you creatively solve problems for a reason? Like, there's no cheating. It's just what can you make? What can you do? I don't really see how you can cheat that. Unless, I said, like, unless you keep someone like locked up in your basement and you make them draw for you and then steal it all online or whatever, but it just sets the bar higher. Yeah, I was just tweaking at the end, just thinking about getting like the edge of her hair to glow a little bit. So I went in and erased it, and then I'm working back in with dark graphite, but just kind of leaving like a fuzzy border, and that can be like a nice effect. This is more straightforward than most things I've been working on recently. I've been very into using like design and contrast in an abstract sense. I'm doing that a lot in my big one. Like, the big drawing, thinking about I don't know, I just get very fascinated with like marks and texture and sort of like implying different, like, I don't know how to describe it. Probably just yeah, trying to create like a unique sense of aesthetics, I suppose, but it's very hard. Right, finishing touches there, just getting that dress dark enough, putting some final shadows in, and I believe this will be the last few minutes, and then I'll just start showing it to the camera. So like I said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope maybe there was some insight into how I work, and I really do mean it. If you bought it and like there was something I didn't cover, or it was really boring to you or whatever, just send me some feedback. I'll like try and answer any questions as much as I can. I tried to, if people ever message me. But thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I love how Gumroad lets people support other people, and I hope this was interesting. And if there's anything else, like if you want to see, I could go over like drawing from life. I could do a portrait from like a live model or anything like that, if there was any interest. Or hate mail or whatever whatever you want. No, but yeah, there it is. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.